Ukrainian Nazism Putin's take. As long as people believed in Communism, Kremlin legitimized its rule as the path to it. After nobody believed, they started legitimizing through World War II. Meanwhile, real history of Soviet-Nazi collaboration is forgotten. Let's discuss Putin's speech. He declared Ukrainians to be neo-Nazis and promised to denazify them. Indeed, the Nazi character of Ukrainian statehood and identity has long been a central thesis of Russian propaganda. Let's discuss why and how it reflects ideology of Putinism. Thread: why do we exist? Different Russian regimes gave different answers to this question. Bolshevik theocracy claimed to lead humanity to the earthly heaven of communism. Until 1960s they were serious about it. In 1960 Khrushchev gave a specific deadline. Communism will be built by 1980. Khrushchev, however, was the last true believer at power. In 1964 he was deposed by Brezhnev, who didn't care. Brezhnev abandoned the agenda of building communism by a specific deadline. Developed socialism would be good enough, so we kinda don't march to the earthly heaven anymore. That, however, created a problem of justification and legitimacy. If we aren't unironically building communism, then why do we exist? What's our source of legitimacy? Brezhnev told, because we won the World War II, we saved humanity from the Nazism, which is our greatest accomplishment ever. Brezhnev transferred the source of state legitimacy from the future to the past, changing the entire narrative. Previously, sacrifices of Stalinism were justified as the path to communism, but now we aren't really going anywhere. So now the sacrifice was necessary to win the war. As a result, Brezhnev started to massively build the cult of great victory. Immediately upon taking power, Brezhnev introduces victory marches on the Red Square every 9th of May, the date of the fall of Berlin. He makes it a ritual of the new state religion, justifying his rule. The cult of victory was made up to fill the hole left by the abandonment of communism building. If we can't say we are marching to the bright future nobody believes, then we'll discuss our great accomplishments in the past. Brezhnev awarded himself with all kinds of World War II medals. The USSR became Russia, and the history repeated itself. In the 1990s, Kremlin was claiming we are building the bright future and gonna become rich and developed like the West. By 2000 nobody believed in that future. So Putin again transferred the source of legitimacy to the past. As a result, new, highly idiosyncratic ideology of Putinism emerged. It combined the respect to Stalinism, which achieved the great victory, the Russian Orthodox clericalism, the Russian ethno-nationalism. It's often mocked as Russian Orthodox national communist monarchism. Again, this led to a retrospective change in the narrative. Stalin became good cause he restored the Russian Empire and won the war. But Stalin didn't want to restore the Russian Empire, he was building communism, and he didn't intend to wage this war, at least not like that. To start with, Stalin regarded Germany as his natural ally against the Versailles victors, UK and France, so he needed to pump Germany up, make it stronger. Long before the rise of Hitler, Stalin had been building the German military might, which would then strike on allies. After World War I, Germany couldn't organize proper training for its military, so Stalin invited German officers to the USSR schools to get experience with high-tech armaments. For example, Guderian, the future architect of German Blitzkrieg, learned how to use tanks in Kazan Tank Academy. Consider a talk between Molotov and Kurt von Schleicher, a conservative chancellor of Germany, in 1932. Schleicher complained about subversions by German communists. Molotov responded, USSR won't mind if Germany treats their communists as USSR is treating enemies of the people. Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact wasn't an aberration. It was a geopolitical decision independent from who's in power in Berlin. Stalin was building German military power to unleash it on the Allies. He was totally okay with sacrificing German communists, whether to Schleicher or to Hitler. So all the talks about this pact delaying the war are BS. Stalin didn't want to delay the war. He wanted to accelerate it and to use Germany as his instrument for destroying the Versailles Order. In 1939, Soviet and German forces crashed Poland together and paraded in Brest. Consider a caricature from the Soviet satirical journal Crocodile. At this point we finish studying the history of the Polish state. Children, in 1939 Soviet propaganda considered the World War II to be very good and very funny thing. Everything was going as planned. That's a caricature from the New Year Eve 1940 to 1941 on the German bombings of London. Gentlemen, where's the nearest bomb shelter? Once again, Soviet propaganda cheered the Nazis' carpet bombings London. That was the Stalin's plan and everything was going according to the plan. What was Stalin hoping for? Most probably he miscalculated. Most probably he was planning for a long, indecisive war between Germany against France and Britain like in World War I. Western Europe would be largely destroyed and then victorious Stalin would come and fuck everyone. Soviet poetry equals published state propaganda, translated exactly this agenda. Consider Kulczycki's poem from 1941. Secret trains are already going to the borders, and the communism is just as near as in 1919. Translation, we created chaos and gonna use it to win and conquer. But Soviet-trained German military crushed the Allies in no time, while the Soviet military who taught them were slaughtered during the Great Purge 1937 to 1938. Like the main advocate of tanks Tukhachevsky 3/5 marshals, 58/62 corps commanders executed. Soviet army was destroyed. Stalin expected that Hitler might attack, but he believed that Soviet army was strong enough to repel them quickly. On paper he had much more tanks, guns, planes. So when Hitler did attack on the 22nd of June, 1941, Stalin was calm. He ordered his troops to beat them off and counterattack. For a few days he believed the plan is working, and you know why? Nobody dared to tell him it's not. So he was calm and content, everything working perfectly. Only on the 29th of June, a week after the war started, he learned that Minsk has fallen. That meant the road on Moscow is open. How was it possible? Minsk was covered by the strongest army USSR had, the Western Front, administered by the Belarus Military District. Stalin called the People's Commissariat, equals Ministry of Defense, and asked what is the situation on the Western Front. They couldn't say anything. Stalin was alarmed. He ordered Molotov, Malenkov, Beria and Mikoyan to get into car and they all drove to the commissariat. Stalin told to connect him with the Belarus Military District. Zhukov told there's no connection, and Stalin realized the Western Army doesn't exist anymore. He yelled at Zhukov so hard that Zhukov ran out to another room and wept. When Politburo members left the commissariat, Stalin told, Lenin left us the great state and we wasted it, Stalin left to his dacha alone. Politburo members divided. Voznesensky said that if Stalin doesn't care, then Molotov should lead the state. Molotov refused. They all went to Stalin's dacha. Stalin looked very badly and asked why did they come. Mikoyan thought Stalin feared that they came to arrest him. Molotov said they must form a defense committee to run the country, and Stalin should lead it. Okay, said Stalin. He looked surprised. On the 6th of July, Chief of Soviet Military Intelligence General Lieutenant Galeev departed to London to discuss coordination of efforts in this war. Thus the USSR allied with the US and the UK. USA organized Lend-Lease, enormous military help in food, in fuel, in vehicles, in armament. They supplied Soviet army for the entire war. Otherwise USSR would lose, its supply chains being disrupted by the German advance. In the course of the war the narrative changed again. Now nobody would admit that the USSR wanted the war, that it built up the German military machine as an icebreaker against the West. No, the USSR was peaceful, consistently anti-Nazi, the force of light against the darkness. It was a lie, but a convenient lie. The alliance would be difficult if Western powers admitted the truth, that the Soviets were purposefully building up the German military machine and de facto allied with Hitler in 1939 to 1931, dividing Eastern Europe together. So the West bought it. That's how a myth of the anti-Nazi USSR was born. It was recognized by the West, which didn't want to question the role of its allies in building up the Nazi military machine. After belief in communism died, it became a legitimizing myth of the Soviet state, inherited by Russia. It didn't only legitimize every single regime in Kremlin which was saint and holy because Soviets defeated the Nazis, whose military they built up. It also became a universal tool of Russian imperialism, a weapon against any Eastern Europeans resisting the encroachment of Moscow. In the most extreme case, it takes the form of the narrative about traitorous ethnicities. Many ethnicities were accused of collaborating with Nazis and deported en masse from their homeland to wastelands of Siberia and Kazakhstan. Mortality was enormous. Let's examine this narrative by checking the timeline. The ethnic-based deportations and massacres started long before the war. In 1936, Ukrainian Poles were deported to Kazakhstan en masse. In 1937, Far Eastern Koreans. In 1938, Chinese. Consider the Great Purge of 1937 to 1938. 111,071 spies were executed within the Polish operation, 41,898 during the Germans' one, 5,439 during Romanian. Huge number of Finns, Latvians, in German lands and others were included into shooting lists simply for being minorities. The USSR was already conducting huge ethnic cleansings before the war, before any collaboration with the Nazis could even start. The war didn't really change anything. It allowed Soviets to carry on, but now with a perfect excuse. We're cleansing minorities because they're Nazi. Does it mean there was no collaboration? There was, and it was massive. Stalin's regime was widely hated, and many saw the war as a chance to overthrow it. BTW ethnic Russians joined Nazis the most massively. Pro-German Russian Liberation Army had more than 1 million soldiers. Russian Liberation Army used traditions symbolic of Russian Empire, like the red-blue-white tricolor which Russia uses now. In 1945 these flags were thrown to the Red Square together with swastikas. That's why old Soviet veterans viewed new Russian flag as Nazi, Vlasov's flag. The anti-Nazi narrative of Russian authorities is simply a weapon against those Eastern Europeans who wouldn't submit to their will. Russia points to pro-Nazi symbolics in Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, according to the same logic, Russia uses the Nazi flag and symbols. Grim truth is that Nazis found some support pretty much everywhere they came. In all Europe there were people who would join Axis. Reasons varied: survival, career, revenge. Many minority nationalists, for example Slovak ones, felt discriminated and hoped to achieve independence. Consistent anti-Nazi struggle as understood by Moscow, when entire ethnicities are forever tainted and accursed because some of their members joined Nazis many decades ago, would require ethnic cleansing, well, of entire Europe, including Russia itself. Of course Russia wouldn't do it consistently. It would rather use it as a weapon to silence any foreign opposition to its domination. If you don't submit and surrender to Putin, that proves you are Nazi. That's some real reductio ad Hitlerum scaled up. Why Russia uses it? First, because it's compatible with Russian Foundation myth that rulers in Kremlin are sane because once they defeated the Nazi Germany, of course they won't tell that it was Kremlin that built up Nazi military might and allied with them on the early stages of World War II. Some Russians know what bees it is. There's a joke. Every true patriot knows that Russian history started in 1941, and only traitors lie that it started in 1939. It reflects that World War II is a foundation myth of Russian regime and that Kremlin lies about its true role in the war. Second reason is that the West first bought this convenient lie, in order not to question the origins of Nazi military might, and continues buying it. Persisting in feel-good lies is emotionally easy, but it will cost a heavy price that the West is only starting to pay. End of thread.